Hi everyone, Dr. Krisha here. Today we are kicking off energy section, so super exciting, all about how can we improve our energy and make it more sustainable, because that's what really matters, right? Without energy, we literally can't do anything. We can't get out of bed, do all the fun activities we want to do, and the not so fun activities. So super exciting. So this one we're gonna just go jump right on in. So there we are. So this is a fun little quote that I found from Tony Robbins. The higher your energy level, the more efficient your body. The more efficient your body, the better you feel, and the more productive you feel. The more efficient your body, the better you feel, and the more you will use your talent to produce outstanding results. And that's what's important, is to be able to do the things that you want to be doing. And energy is the way to do that and make yourself more efficient. So let's talk about how you can optimize your energy. So when I think about low energy, or if someone comes to me to talk about fatigue or low energy, one of the first things I actually think about is red blood cells, particularly with women. And when I talk about red blood cells, it's more so anemia. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but red blood cells are all about getting oxygen into the cells. And so I want to talk a little bit about what symptoms you'll see, or like other symptoms that I pay attention to that will cue me into one of these other things. So for red blood cells, if someone is having, or anemia, if I suspect someone has anemia, they'll have fatigue, they'll usually be like short of breath because there's not enough oxygen within the system. Usually other symptoms, it's usually females, because females, we menstruate, and so we're literally losing blood every month or so. And so some women's periods are heavier, and if they're heavier, then that's what that's going to do then is deplete your red blood cells even more. And if you don't have enough iron, you're not going to be able to replenish your red blood cells back in, which then means you're going to have anemia, and you can have a fatigue, again, the shortness of breath. You can have not so much difficulties getting up and out of bed. It's kind of like a more blanket state, easily winded, really low exercise tolerance, right? Because you're just not getting enough oxygen in. Mitochondria, so mitochondria are your powerhouses of your cells. It's where cellular respiration actually happens. We're going to talk more about that later on. But with mitochondria, the other symptoms we're also looking at is maybe there's also muscle fatigue or muscle weakness, because you need that ATP, that energy, in order to flood your entire system. And most of our energy is actually consumed by our muscles. So if you don't have that, then your mitochondria, if your mitochondrial health is on the lower side, then you might also have that muscle weakness or that muscle fatigue or tiredness, kind of feeling like you're sore all the time. All right, and then adrenals. So adrenals, we talked about that in RAST 102, all about stress management, because our adrenals play such a large role in our stress response. Adrenal, if I think about someone who has adrenal fatigue, is one term. The newer, more modern term is HPA axis dysfunction or adrenal dysfunction, which basically just means that you've had this chronic stress, and so then that's depleted your cortisol levels, then are out of whack, which then means your sleeping can be imbalanced. You can have difficulties getting out of bed in the morning, because cortisol is actually what wakes you up in the morning. So if your cortisol levels are so depleted, you're not having that cortisol bump in the morning to actually wake you up. So you can have difficulties getting up in the morning. You can have, depending on how severe the HPA dysfunction is, you can actually have fatigue throughout the entire day. You can also have insomnia. So if your cortisol levels are out of whack at night, then what that's going to mean is usually our cortisol levels are low at night, but sometimes we get this reverse system where it actually will be elevated. And if that's elevated, then what's going to happen is your body will think that you're actually waking up because you've had a relative increase in those cortisol levels, which then means you're going to have insomnia, really struggle with falling to sleep. You can also have difficulty staying asleep if you get that cortisol spike later in the night. Other things that can happen with adrenal fatigue is you can also have anxiety because you're getting an imbalance in the neurotransmitters as well, which we talked a little bit about in Mind 101. Well, we talked a lot about neurotransmitters, but not so much about adrenals. Okay, and then thyroid also is another big player when I'm thinking about low energy, because the thyroid gland, which is right here, is the gland that's in charge of our metabolism. So if you have low thyroid function or hypothyroidism for whatever reason, that will manifest also as difficulties getting up in the morning. It can also manifest as constipation because everything's just a little bit sluggish. You can also have dry skin because you're not getting that moisture as well, part of the thyroid function. It helps with the skin. Other things that I think about with thyroid is kind of like that low energy. A particular thing is that so the way that I can kind of distinguish the adrenals versus the thyroid off of kind of blank statement, not that it's perfect, but kind of clues me in a little bit more or become more suspicious of one or the other, is whether or not exercise makes it better. So if exercise actually improves energy, then I'm thinking more so focusing on the adrenal gland. So if we don't have the money, the finances for the testing, or whatever reason, if you feel better when you exercise, then I am thinking more so the adrenal gland. And the reason for that is because when you exercise, you actually will get you'll rev your adrenal glands such that it pushes a little bit more epinephrine, which is the endorphin part of the endorphin system. And so that adrenaline then will give you more energy. Whereas with thyroid, if you have low thyroid function and you exercise, you're still going to feel tired, right? Because it didn't have any effect on the thyroid gland. Of course, I prefer labs. Sex hormones also are a bigger player. I think mostly about testosterone, because testosterone will increase your energy, or if you have enough of it, if you're lower on the testosterone side, which can happen really commonly with just imbalances in your hormones. And then that can actually happen from chronic stress, because it just, when you're stressed out, then it actually will downplay or suppress your libido and your reproductive system, which then also means your sex hormones. So those are kind of the big players that I think about when someone comes to me for low energy. Now we're gonna go ahead and focus on the top 3 today, and then next week we'll focus on the thyroid and sex hormones. All right, so red blood cells, RBCs. It's the cellular source of oxygen, and we need oxygen in order to actually have cellular respiration, which is how we power our mitochondria. It's the whole mitochondrial process, which is the powerhouse of your cells. It's literally how you make energy. And so red blood cells, because of their iron, the heme, which holds the iron, which then holds the oxygen, helps to feed that system. So without oxygen, you're not gonna have the energy, you're not gonna have the endurance, which is why when we see anemia, one of the symptoms, right, is that shortness of breath. Other symptoms of anemia can be like thinner blood, so you can actually some women will actually have heavier menses because of that. Other women will actually have loss of period or stop menstruation because they don't have enough blood, so their body's like, I need it, I need to hold on to it. And then once we actually fix the anemia, the menses will actually fix itself. I've also had it where women who with iron deficiency anemia in particular had severe heavy periods and cramping, and just by giving them iron was enough to get rid of the cramping and also make it so that their blood was a little bit thicker, so their menses wasn't as heavy. The reason that cramping actually improves is because you're in the uterus, there's 2 types of arteries. There's straight arteries and then there's spiral arteries. Spiral arteries are the ones that actually will clamp down, so they try to stop the bleeding. And so what happens with women with anemia, the body is trying to conserve the blood. And so what it will do is actually initiate those spiral arteries to clamp down, which then you're going to get a lot of that cramping. And then again, if we just give you iron, it can really help to improve the cramping. Though of course there are other causes of menstrual cramping, but anemia is actually one of them. Okay, so when I'm thinking about anemia, I want to run labs because there's no other way for me to find out whether or not someone is anemic. So I look at CBC, which is the complete blood count. That's just looking at literally the numbers of red blood cells. It looks at the main ones that I'm looking at, the hemoglobin and the hematocrit. So hemoglobin is actually the iron-containing portion of the red blood cells. So it tells me whether or not there's enough iron, partially iron within the red blood cells. And then hematocrit is actually out of all of the blood, how much is red blood cells. So that's important because it tells me like how much do you have enough total of the irons or the red blood cells. So it's not just a matter of the pure number, but actually how the percent essentially. The other things that I really care about is the total iron. So the total iron is just what's free floating. And then I'm actually going to skip to ferritin. So ferritin is actually a really important lab to get run. And it's not always done on Western labs. What I like about ferritin is that it's the back stores of the iron. So essentially what that means is your body will store iron and ferritin, and that's really helpful because when we're pulling out iron, we're going to pull from our iron stores first, so the ferritin, and then that's going to be the total iron, because what we're trying to do essentially is make sure that we have enough red blood cells, so that's the last thing that's going to get depleted. So ferritin is like our canary in the coal mine almost, because if that one's low, that's going to be the first one to get low, and then the next one will be the total iron, and then you'll see the effects on the CBC, where you have low red blood cells or hematocrit or hemoglobin or all of them. So I like checking ferritin because for me, the way that I think about it is a little bit more preventatively, where if I start seeing a low ferritin, and optimal for me is between like 40 and 60 within that spectrum. And so if the ferritin is low, then I'm thinking, okay, we need to start adding iron in or get other iron sources in. And then we have the TIBC, which is total iron binding capacity, and the percent SAT. So both of those are actually the way that we pull from their ferritin and get it into the total iron. So those are helpful because essentially it's like the buses and how full are the buses. If you have a lot of buses and they're really empty, it usually just tells me that you don't have enough ferritin, you don't have enough iron. The other possibility is actually that you don't have the cofactors in order to push them through that pathway. So then that would mean you have normal ferritin, but you have a lower, that abnormal TIBC and the percent SAT, and then your total iron is actually on that lower side. So really just helps me to figure out what is the best treatment in order to treat the anemia and to prevent it from getting worse. And then another thing I want to talk about is heme iron versus non-heme iron. So when we're thinking about, so say I have someone who has anemia, which happens all the time. I'm actually historically have been anemic. And so it's important to know the distinction between heme iron and non-heme iron. So heme iron is the same thing that's in animals. It's what our body actually uses, right? Because if you think of, when I talked about the CBC, right, we were looking at hemoglobin, and it's that hemoglobin which binds that iron, which then actually allows for that oxygen to be utilized within the human body. And so our body really likes iron and heme iron because it doesn't have to do as much work as if it's in non-heme iron. If it's in non-heme iron, that's in our plants. So like spinach is a pretty good source. You have the dark molasses is another good source. The problem though with non-heme iron is that we don't actually absorb it very well because it's not the form that our body uses, and so we need a lot more of that non-heme iron in order to actually make it usable into our system. So I definitely have stronger preference for heme iron. So sources of heme iron is going to be animal products, so actually like red meat, or actually just doing supplementation. So the supplements that I use, there's different iron forms. There's ferrous sulfate. Ferrous sulfate is basically like a chunk of iron. So it's harder on the body. It's more likely to cause constipation. The thing with iron though, or the ferrous the ferrous sulfate is that because it's so highly absorbed, your body will actually, it'll absorb it really well, and so your numbers will actually go up a lot faster. And I'm talking about oral forms, not no IV, which there is, that is an option, especially for folks who are really, really anemic, which does happen every so often, and actually happens more so in my inflammatory bowel disease patients because they're bleeding a lot more significantly. Okay, and then so that's ferrous sulfate. It's heavier, it's harder on the digestive tract, but it will increase numbers the fastest. So if people have a stomach of steel, you know, like a really great digestive tract and no issues with that and no tendency towards constipation, then the ferrous sulfate might be a really good option. And then we have iron bisglycinate. Iron bisglycinate, and then with the other forms that we use are the non-heme iron. So the iron bisglycinate is actually my preferred form because it is right in between. So the plant-based is going to be the non-heme iron. That's our other form of iron that I'll use for my really sensitive patients, but I prefer not to because it's not going to increase the numbers very well. And so iron bisglycinate tends to be my preferred form, and the reason for that is it's pretty well absorbed, and it doesn't have, it's a little bit easier on the digestive tract, so it's less likely to cause constipation, that nausea and all that stuff. Iron is better when it's taken on an empty stomach, and it's also better, actually higher absorbed when it's taken every other day. And the reason for that is if you think about iron in nature, what does it do? It rusts, right? So if you have iron in your body and your body knows that it's like, it has this tendency to rust, which actually is just that it's highly, can cause high oxidative stress, meaning that it's really inflammatory. And your body's like, I don't want to have too much inflammation. So when you take it every day, it will actually make it so that you don't absorb as much of it. So I usually will recommend my patients to take it every other day in order to increase the absorption of the iron. And then on top of that, taking it with vitamin C, whether that's with like orange juice or actually like vitamin C capsule. A lot of times the iron that I'll use is iron bisglycinate that already has vitamin C in it, to help that iron absorption, which means then you take less but get more out of it, which is a win-win in my opinion. And there is a picture of a cast iron skillet because if you cook with a cast iron skillet, that will actually also increase your iron stores because you'll get a little bit of that iron through in your food when you're cooking with it. Side note with getting iron sources is that there are some who will actually tend to hold on to iron really, really well. That's actually a bad thing because I talked about, right, with iron, it has this, it's really inflammatory, so we don't want to have too much iron. So I'll even run my iron labs on my male patients who are less likely to have anemia, and honestly can actually be on that other side where they have too much iron, and then the treatment for that is actually to donate blood. So you're actually letting go some of that red blood cells and that iron within your blood so that you can then regenerate more red blood cells and use that iron up, so that it's not wreaking havoc elsewhere in your body. Okay, so that's all about red blood cells and iron anemia and all that, because again, that is honestly, if I find that as the reason for fatigue, it is like the fastest one to fix because it's literally just one pill, or increase, eat more red meats and cook in your cast iron skillet, things like that, which is really relatively easy to do. All right, let's talk about mitochondria. So the mitochondria, if you remember way back in like elementary middle school, it is the cellular powerhouse. So it is actually it was actually a previously bacteria, and then our cells ate it essentially, incorporated it into our own cells, and so now we have this powerhouse within our cells, and so that's only found in prokaryote. It was a prokaryote, and we are eukaryote, so super. Anyways, so having the mitochondria though, their biggest thing is to generate ATP, which is the actual power, that's the source of energy. So it's all about making ATP. because that's where we're going to get all the energy from. Fun fact about mitochondria is that the DNA, so the ability for our cells to make mitochondria, actually comes from our moms. So almost all of our DNA, except for the mitochondrial DNA, are split between our mom and our dad for the most part, except for the mitochondria, where it actually is just from the mom. So the maternal DNA is where you learned how to make your mitochondria. So thanks, moms. All right, so this right here is all about cellular respiration. So what we're looking at is we have these different systems within our body that generate energy. So first thing is, oops, let's go back, glycolysis. So we start off with glucose. Where are you gonna get glucose from? Your food. So it's all about getting those calories in, that sugar in, and then your body's gonna do work. So it's going to pull through the glucose. It's going to make, like, we get an ATP. We actually we use one of our energy, so it actually takes energy to break down glucose to bind it to the glucose 6-phosphate and then change it to fructose. So we lose 2 energy. That's just our energy investment stage. That's us saying, all right, we're committing to making more energy because I'm pretty darn sure that I use 2 now. I'll make a whole lot more later on in the down. Totally true. So you use 2 energies, but then you add in, so you get 2 of those products right there. And now we keep going through the whole system, and then you get 4 more ATP. So now we're ahead 2, yay. And now what we're gonna do is actually take that pyruvate, throw it into the mitochondria, and then go through the Krebs cycle and utilize the electron transport chain. So far, we've used glucose, we've used some ATP, and we've also used some NADH. And so these particular, this actually comes from niacin. So niacin is a B vitamin. We're gonna talk a little bit more about that because that's one of the nutrients that your body needs in order to actually go through the cellular respiration, which is actually how you make energy. And then other important things that happen throughout the cycle is we actually will waste out carbon dioxide. That's our waste. And then we're going to talk more about the electron transport chain on the next slide because there's a few specific nutrients and cofactors that are needed during that phase. And so the other thing I want to pay attention to, so we are, is the NAD and the FAD. So both of those are actually derived from your B vitamins. So we need B vitamins in order to actually make ATP, because if we don't have those B vitamins, say we're deficient in that niacin or the riboflavin, which is where the FAD comes from, then what that means is it's going to limit your ability to actually generate energy. So you're going to be stuck, even though say you have enough glucose, but you don't have enough of the B vitamins, you're not going to be able to progress and onto the end product. All right, so other important thing is coenzyme A here. That's going to become important in a little bit. And now we have the electron transport chain. So the important thing here, again, we have the NAD, but here we have CoQ. So coenzyme Q or CoQ10 is probably how you've heard most of it, or ubiquinone, is another important cofactor in the system, because what it does, it actually helps to hold on to those electrons, because in the electron transport chain, guess what we're doing? We're transporting electrons down the chain. And so CoQ helps to do that. So we want to make sure we have enough of the CoQ, because if we don't have that coenzyme Q, then what's going to push down our electrons? We're going to get stuck. So we want to make sure we have enough of that as well. And then you'll also see here, we actually do need that oxygen. So this is where the oxygen comes into play as part of our, for the energy synthesis. So that's the cellular respiration aspect. All right. So big overview on the electron transport chain and how we do all that fun stuff. So here's the mitochondrial nutrients. So what's required for ATP? So we need glucose. Glucose is going to straight come from your diet. That's nutrition, right? That's the first 2 things that we talked about, was nutrition and improving digestion, because that's where we're going to get our glucose. It's also where we're going to get most of our B vitamins, which are really important. So it's again, still comes down to the basics, the other things that we talked about, because again, those are really foundational. So making sure that you're still having good nutrition in order to support your energy is really helpful. It's really beneficial. Oxygen. So that's going to be we need that heme iron, right? Actually in our red blood cells in order to get that oxygen into all of our cells, because that's where our mitochondria are in all of our cells, except for the red blood cells. And then the CoQ10. So CoQ10, right, we talked about why that's important. And then we have acetyl-CoA, which also is important. That's actually derived from pantothenic acid, which is B5. Talked about NAD, that's derived from niacin, or B3. FAD, that's derived from riboflavin, or B2. So you see now all these are really important. When we talk about your red blood cells, you actually need B12 in order to help with getting that iron into the cells, pulling from the ferritin into the iron. And so B12 is also now really important for the mitochondrial health as well, and your energy production. A lot of folks will actually get like B12, if you've ever gotten like a B12 IM or intramuscular injection, so like a vaccine but with B12. That injection, right, is just the B12 in particular, and it can help improve your energy because of that reason. All right, and then habits. So what can you do? So we talked about like the nutrition aspect and why we need our B vitamins, why we need to breathe, and make sure that we have enough iron, right? But what other things can we do in order to support our mitochondria so that we can improve our energy production? So hydrotherapy. Hydrotherapy is just the use of water. So cold therapy, that is like ending your showers, and so taking a hot shower and then ending on a cold rinse, whether that's 30, 60, or 90 seconds. There was actually a study that showed that each of those different cycles actually, so no matter how much, whether it's 30 seconds or 90 seconds, you do have a benefit for your mitochondria where it actually will help to improve their function. So that's improves via the mitochondrial health via mitochondrial biogenesis. So it will help to improve the health because it helps to stimulate more mitochondria. So it actually will increase the production. More mitochondria in your cells means that you're going to have more energy production down the road. So that's a good thing. Next, so cold therapy helps. So does heat therapy. So if you're using heat, so that's like a sauna, or just doing alternating hot and cold. So the benefit of hot and cold, the contrast hydro, which is one of my favorite things ever, is that the heat therapy, right, improves the mitochondrial function. So it actually helps to make them more efficient, but it also stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis, just like the cold therapy does. So what that means, right, is again, you're going to get more mitochondria and they're going to be more efficient. So now if you do alternating hot and cold, 3 minutes hot followed by 30 seconds cold, that would be one round. You always end on cold. What that's going to do is so much things. So it actually will part of what's happening in that cycle is that the heat actually will help to cause in your circulatory system vasodilation. So that makes your circulatory system nice and big, all those arteries. And then what's going to happen is you do the cold, and the cold is going to cause massive vasoconstriction. I particularly like to do the contrast hydrotherapy 3 rounds, so consecutive. And what that then means, right, if you're doing that, is you're getting big, small, big, small, big, small within your circulatory system, which is enhancing the pumping function, which then means you're also getting more oxygen into your cells, which is going to improve your mitochondrial health. And so you get extra benefit, right? Because you're making sure that your mitochondria are getting all of the oxygen, you're flushing out all of the crap out of the lymphatic system, which then is making sure that you're getting all the toxins out of the cells, so they're not bathed in that. So it also helps improve the mitochondrial function. And then so if you in particular use red or near infrared light, so like an infrared sauna, it activates the cytochrome C oxidase in your mitochondria, which actually will then increase your ATP production. So if you happen to have access to a far infrared sauna, you do that and then finish up with a cold rinse. What that's going to do then is give you the maximum amount, right, of benefit, where you're going to increase your ATP production by stimulating that cytochrome C oxidase, but then also utilizing that cold to stimulate the creation of more mitochondria. So it's like a win-win. So of course, why not do that? So again, love the hot and the cold together. My trick though, if you have not done ending your hot showers on a cold rinse, don't do it you just need a temperature difference. The bigger the temperature difference, the greater the pumping action. But you can still have a benefit without having it to be a really big difference. The benefit of doing alternating the hot and cold is that you're gonna get let's see, hold on, I got distracted because, anyways. So with the alternating hot and cold, you're gonna get the pumping action, all that jazz. Trick is to actually use friction. So when I do the cold, I'll rinse like this, and that will help to make it so it's not so cold feeling. And then I always actually will, if you do 3 rounds, you can just go back to hot and cold, back and forth. I tend to make it a little bit hotter, a little bit colder each time, because you can tolerate it a little bit more and you get a little bit more health benefits when it's more extreme. But again, you don't need to in order to get those benefits. Okay. Next. Other good habits for your mitochondria is exercise, and in particular, so all exercise is going to benefit your mitochondria, but in particular, high intensity interval training helps to improve that mitochondrial health a little bit more, and in particular is because you're also getting that aerobic exercise in, so that breathe the aerobic or the respiration training, because you're doing the high intensity, right? The big bursts, so you're having to use your energy really quickly, then you get a little bit of recovery, and then you go again. And so that helps to improve also your respiration, which is how it's going to improve your mitochondria as well. Okay, other thing is sleep. Sleep is so incredibly important. We've already talked about how sleep is so important. And the reason that sleep is so incredibly important for your mitochondria is because it relies on that lymphatic system. So if you recall, I think we talked about, that was Rest 101. We talked about the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is your brain's cleaning house system. And so that only gets activated when you're in that deep sleep. So you want to make sure that you're getting into those stages. So if you need a refresher, go back to that webinar, Sleep 101, where I talked all about deep sleep in particular and how you can improve that, because we don't want all that extra crap and toxins in our brains. We want to make sure that we're getting that out, because it's also going to improve your mitochondrial health, and we all want a good amount of energy. Grounding. So this one was actually really fun for me to learn about, because I'll just actually read the quote because it's so good. So mitochondria in the grounded subjects are not producing as much metabolic energy, probably because there's less demand due to more rapid achievement of homeostasis. So you're actually utilizing your energy better. So you don't need to produce as much energy because you're utilizing your energy better, because you're more grounded. You're getting to that homeostasis a lot faster. How cool is that? So ground, how do you do grounding? One great way to do grounding is just the deep belly breathing, which I've talked a lot about, which also will improve your oxygenation within your system, which will also help to make sure that all your cells are getting bathed in oxygen. Another way to do grounding is to walk barefoot in the ocean, or like a beach is the best place. But even just on the grass is really beneficial, because it just helps to actually discharge some of our energy. So very grounding, which improves your mitochondria too. So it's like great stress management and all those wonderful things. All right, let's talk about the adrenals. So we talked a little bit about this in when I talked about stress, which was Rest 102. So in the adrenals, so we're talking about that HPA axis with the hypothalamus, the hypothalamus in the brain. That's where we get that signal of whether or not we have that stress response or not. And then you have your pituitary gland, which is also in here. So you have the hypothalamus, the pituitary, they'll talk to each other, and then they talk to the adrenal gland. They tell the adrenal gland whether or not to pump out cortisol, norepinephrine, epinephrine, all that stuff, whether or not we should have a stress response. So again, that simulates the norepinephrine, the epinephrine, which is adrenaline. And of course, adrenaline, right, gets us all hopped up, makes us all super strong and super energetic, because that's what it does, so that we can either fight that tiger that's coming at us or run away. I'm probably gonna run away. Hopefully you didn't see me. Okay, so the adrenal glands, those, that photo right there is the adrenal glands sitting on top of the kidneys, because that's where they're at. They're just sitting on top. They're like the little kidney hats. All right, let's talk about adrenal health. So chronic stress, guess what? I kind of just assume everyone's in chronic stress right now, because we're 6 months into the pandemic, and living in these times is just really stressful, because everything's really chaotic and changing, and so there's that stability is a little bit more lacking. There's not as much certainty, and humans just tend to worry a little bit more in those kind of situations, because we don't have as much control. So anyways, chronic stress, and then that's going to lead into that HPA axis dysfunction. So the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the adrenal glands get a little bit wonky, which then is going to eventually result in lower cortisol, lower norepinephrine, and lower epinephrine, which can result in the abnormalities that I talked about. So you can have so symptoms that we're looking for is fatigue. You can have anxiety, you can have depression, you can have insomnia, right? Because those cortisol levels are so important if they're uneven. So normally we'll have it high in the morning, and then it slowly will dip down throughout the day, to the point where you're at the lowest point at when it's bedtime. Cortisol actually has an inverse relationship with melatonin. So if you have low cortisol, you're going to have higher melatonin, and vice versa. So this is why part of it, right, is the cortisol is the jump start. So if you don't have the cortisol levels high enough in the morning, you can really struggle with getting up in the morning, because you just don't have anything to kick you up, to wake you up. And then it can, again, also, if you have too much of cortisol at night, then your body thinks you should be up. So you'll have difficulties falling asleep or staying asleep, or both. And there's treatments that I do with that. I do definitely prefer testing, so because it gives me exactly how that cortisol curve looks like. It's a really easy test. It's saliva, so it's really just spitting in these little vials. And then you test that over 4 different time slots. So you do it within 30 minutes of waking, in the morning, afternoon, and then at night. And what that helps to do is generate that curve for me to see, is it a normal curve, or how far along are we in this dysfunction? Because there's different stages, where if it's more dysfunctional, you're having basically like a flatline cortisol, you're gonna feel like crap, and with really low energy, just because you don't have any of that cortisol. You don't have anything to rev the system. And so that's a very different treatment. I'll actually, the best treatment for that is just to give cortisol, which actually would be hydrocortisone, or which is a lower, less potent dose of like prednisone, so a steroid. Because at that point, right, you just need it. And then there's other phases where it's like phase 1, where it's just trending that way. And so I can utilize herbs and nutrition supplements in order to help optimize that. So again, I like the testing, because it just clarifies the severity of the dysfunction, which then tells me how aggressive do I need to be with the treatment. And again, because, right, we have, like I talked about right in the beginning, there's so many different causes for fatigue. And so I don't want to just jump straight to, treating the adrenal glands if I don't need to, though most often I do, because everyone's stressed, including myself. All right, let's go to there. Okay, and so supporting the adrenals. So that could be with stress management, right? Because we want to put the brakes on so that the cortisol doesn't keep getting flooded, because then we're going to deplete our cortisol levels, or norepinephrine, epinephrine, and we want to make sure that we still have some of those stores. So stress management is so incredibly important. Again, go back to the Rest 102, where I talked all about stress management techniques, because it's so incredibly important for your overall health. But in this case, definitely your adrenal glands and your energy. Some herbs that I really like are adaptogenic herbs, which just mean that they are nourishing to the adrenal gland. So avena is one of my absolute favorites for adrenal fatigue or HPA dysfunction. And the reason for that is that avena, or avena sativa is its Latin name, or milky oak tops, the common name, is that it is so nourishing. So it's kind of like if your nervous system's fried, it helps to just, it's like a warm blanket. That's kind of how I imagine it when I take it. That's kind of how it feels. So it's just nourishing to the overall system. So it just kind of calms everything down. Ashwagandha is another great herb that I will use. Really helpful for just helping with that cortisol levels and the overall adrenal gland, really nourishing. It's actually a great endurance herb as well. So it's actually where it gets its name from. I think it translates to like power of like 1,000 horses or something like that. And the idea is that you take ashwagandha and you'll get the strength of those, like so many horses. And then holy basil, also really helpful. So holy basil or tulsi, also a great adaptogenic herb. It's a little bit more balancing, a little bit more cooling actually. If you've ever had like tulsi, it's got a little bit of or tulsi tea. It's got a little bit more of a like flowery taste. And then there's rhodiola. Rhodiola is like one of my absolute favorite herbs. I will use rhodiola to help with the adrenal glands. It's also really helpful actually for depression because it works really well. It's synergistic, or it helps to enhance the activities of St. John's wort. So I'll often put them together. And rhodiola is actually called Arctic rose. And its other name is actually the endurance herb. Athletes use it all the time because it helps to increase the oxygen capacity. And then it just helps to increase your energy production as well. If you take it straight, the tincture, it's actually a little bit like fuzzy feeling, so get your tongue a little bit like fuzzy, a little bit numbing too. Anyways, some great herbs. My general preference for them is generally in tincture form because you can get it straight into the system and I can customize it. And though there are plenty of really, really good blends, both tincture and supplements, and I use both of them. Okay. And then nutrients for the adrenal glands. So eating higher protein in the morning and more carbohydrates at night actually will stimulate higher cortisol release in the morning, right? And you want that because that's what's going to wake you up. And then it will actually help to lower your levels at night, which can help you sleep, right? Because you don't want your cortisol levels high. So changing how or where you get your macronutrients or timing, the micronutrient timing can be really helpful in terms of the adrenal gland if you're struggling with that. Magnesium, so incredibly important because it's an important cofactor, right? So it's needed in order to make sure that the body can create all the that cortisol, the norepinephrine, epinephrine. If it doesn't have magnesium, it can't do that. I'll actually often will have women who will crave, or people in general who crave chocolate. So I like to crave, I love chocolate. But magnesium, dark chocolate in particular, is actually high in magnesium. And so sometimes, well, I don't notice, and by sometimes I mean quite often, especially women during their period, and especially those who have cramps will tend to crave that dark chocolate right before or around their period, because it's their body saying, I need that magnesium in order to help the muscle relax, the uterus to relax. Because if you don't have enough magnesium, right, then your muscles can't relax. They can't, they'll stay tense. So you need magnesium for that. There's different forms of magnesium. So there's magnesium citrate, magnesium malate, magnesium oxide. Those are all great forms for constipation. The citrate malate form, the magnesium malate, is also a little bit more helpful for the muscles as well. So like muscle fatigue. The form that I like the most, particular for treating the adrenal glands and for muscle tension, is magnesium glycinate. And the reason for that is that it's actually the form that we absorb most into our system. So it's going to have the least effect on constipation, but it will be you'll get more of that into your system so that you'll actually get it into your bloodstream and then helping with the muscle to relax and all that jazz. And then B vitamins. So B vitamins so incredibly important, right? We talked about that with mitochondria, but also with your adrenals, because your adrenal glands also rely on the B vitamins in order to create all of the cortisol and the norepinephrine and epinephrine. So we need those B vitamins as well. So that again can be one great source of all your B vitamins is going to be nutritional yeast. I really like that one. And then you can always do supplements. There's no harm with oral supplementation of B vitamins because it's water soluble. So what that means is if you take too much, you'll just urinate them out because your body's not going, you can only absorb so much at a time. So you'll end up getting fluorescent yellow urine, and that's how you know you have enough B vitamins in your system because you're not absorbing those ones. Okay, next is eliminate caffeine. So the coffee, the black tea, the yerba mate, all that stuff. It depletes your B vitamins. So, right, if we're trying to protect your adrenal glands, we don't want to add caffeine because it's going to deplete the B vitamins, but it's also going to rev the system. And you don't have any gas, so you're just revving like a dry system. You don't want to do that because you'll just feel like shit later on, right? You'll just feel worse, more tired eventually. So the other thing is vitamin C, so incredibly important. It's actually stored in the adrenal glands. So fun fact for you. And it's an important cofactor, just like all the B vitamins. So you need the vitamin C in your system in order to make sure that your adrenals are going to have good health and be able to do the things that it needs to do in order to make sure that you have a resilient stress response system. Okay. And then weekly challenge is to end your showers on a cold rinse. Fun. So again, with that, you don't have to be it doesn't have to be extreme all the way to cold. It just needs to be a little bit colder. And to be honest, it feels great, particularly in this heat wave that we're experiencing here in the Pacific Northwest. So helpful for you. All right. And then if you learned something new, tell a friend and send them over to my website, drkrishaolson.com. Send them over to that VIP section so that they can catch the replays because this will be up shortly. All right. With that, I'll take questions Yes, grounding is so good. Walking barefoot on the beach. What I really like about walking barefoot in the beach, why I said that one was one of the best, is because when you walk barefoot, like the beach, the ocean, you get all that connection literally throughout the entire, like the earth is like all connected through that. So there's this thought that you're actually, when your feet are submerged in that ocean water, you're then energetically connected to basically everything else in the world, which I think is just really, really grounding. Okay, and then I had another question here, and I think I had another one. If you whoever raised their hand, if you can feel free to type up your question in either the chat or the Q&A. I'm watching both. But I have a question here. I've heard that wearing masks for long periods creates physiological stress on the body and may create cortisol issues in the long run. Could this be due to higher carbon dioxide exposure because of the mask, or just stress of the whole COVID-19 environment, or a combination? Most likely it's actually because of combination. So the important thing with a mask is that it's not, yes, it can create a little bit more carbon dioxide within the body, but it really kind of depends on the type of mask you're using. But most of them don't interfere actually that much with our ability for oxygenation. It's actually a training tool that high athletes will use is actually to wear a mask because it challenges their respiration. So it's actually more so a function of your lungs when you're wearing a mask. Because you're actually trying to utilize it a little bit more efficiently. And then there's definitely just so much stress. And I think that's probably, if I had to pin a bigger contributor, I definitely would think that it's the stress, that chronic stress, that is creating more of the cortisol issues down the road, because I know that for sure happens, and I know for sure that people are having more stress in their life because of having to deal with all the changes around COVID and having to be on edge essentially with everything that's going on. All right, question was, can you explain NAD plus? My neighbor takes it and swears he has tremendous energy and it has changed his life. Is it safe? So with the NAD plus, it is essentially, so we talked about the NAD, right? If I go back, if that's in that electron transport chain, it's actually one of the important cofactors. That's derived from niacin. So you can just take B vitamins, which are definitely a lot safer, and then your body will make it into the NAD. I forgot to mention something about mitochondria. So when it comes to mitochondria, we care about two things. So it's actually about the ATP generation, so making more ATP, but it's also about all the free radicals. So NAD plus, what it does is it actually will hold on to the hydrogens and electrons, and that's really important because what it's doing is decreasing your oxidative stress within the body. So whenever this is where antioxidants are really important for your mitochondria, because it helps to sequester up all the free radicals, which means you're going to have less byproducts that are essentially trying to kill the cells, because that's what electrons, when they're not bound to something, will do. It's like basically fire waiting to happen. And so the NAD can help to sequester that, which then can also, right, allows you, hold on to the electron so that then you can use it again. So yes, it can definitely help with energy. I don't use it very often in my clinical practice. I prefer using the B vitamins a lot more, because I prefer to get all of the B vitamins in rather than just being focused on one. The only exception to that is if I know for a fact that people have that someone has a particular deficiency in one, like B12, like say I do a B12 serum test, and know exactly what those levels are, then at that point I'm like, okay, you just need B12, you don't need all of them. But even then, oftentimes I'm doing all of them because they all go hand in hand. So like you saw, right, with the mitochondria, just with that, we need our riboflavin, we need our niacin, and so all those other B vitamins become really important, because we don't want to have that imbalance, because otherwise you're just getting a whole bunch of one and not the other ones then will get eventually depleted, and then you'll have issues with that. Okay, and I think there was, did anyone else have any other questions? And feel free to reach out if I didn't finish, or if I wasn't clear about that NAD and not anything else you'd like clarification on. And I think, let's see, any other questions for me? Otherwise, we will go. All right, everyone. Well, it's always a pleasure. And tune in next week where I'll talk more about, well, we'll be continuing the talk on all about energy, specifically talking about the thyroid gland and sex hormones, because those are so incredibly important for your energy, for partly your energy. And then our last webinar the following week will be on community and the importance of that for overall health. So have a wonderful rest of your week, and end your showers on cold rinse. All right, with that, bye everyone.